Hello, and thank you for joining Growing Tech Fast, the condensed Org3D podcast where we talk about growing tech startups with those who have grown them. So today I'm joined by Rhett, CEO of LoanPro. It's great to have you on the podcast today. How are you doing?
Great. Hi, Holly. Happy to be here today.
Yeah, great to have you on. I'm really excited to hear more. For the benefit of our listeners, can you tell me a little bit more about who you are and the mission with the work you're doing?
You bet. So my name is Rhett Roberts. I'm a co-founder and CEO of LoanPro. We provide a loan servicing core or a lending core. Think of the back office that's needed for any lending company or bank. How does all of those operations run? And our software application and products do that for them.
Yeah, cool. Love that. Great. And tell me a little bit more about how LoanPro came about. For example, what was your background before?
Sure. Yeah, so our genesis story is I did my education in investment finance. And after graduating, a bunch of my friends were going back to Wall Street and had a few offers back there and kind of wondered, is this the lifestyle I want to do or not? And I'd always been bit by the entrepreneur bug. And so I figured, well, it's a good time in life to try to start a business, but I didn't have any idea what I was doing. I joined my two brothers and we started a car dealership. Bought and sold cars for a few years, and it was really interesting, but we found we could meet our customers' needs better there with financing options. So at that time, there was a gap in the market. You had subprime and prime financing, but if you were in the middle somewhere, there weren't a lot of great financing options for you. And so we created what's now known as a related finance company and started into the world of not only buying and selling cars, but also of financing them. And we loved it. We just fell in love with the lending business and the business model to it. And so we decided to scale and grow that business, but we ran into a roadblock. The technology to manage these loans, because we didn't have an issue sourcing, underwriting, and decisioning. Our problem was once you push money out the door in a compliant way, how do you keep track of all of it? And how do you stay well organized and all the math being done the right way? All at the same time while having a modern tech stack. Like we wanted easy functionality and user interfaces, like an app and a website that they can real-time interact with their loan, those types of things that you would assume are standard. But to our finding, they weren't. They didn't exist. Most of the technology from the incumbents was rooted in the 80s and early 90s and that created what we felt like was a frustrating experience. So we kind of maybe a little naive at the time. We essentially just jumped in and started building software for our own internal use. And I did that for a number of years, and we had built what we felt was a pretty strong product. And we're leaning on the lending side of things. And others in the ecosystem reached out to us and said, "Hey, we're having these problems. What do you guys do?" We said, "Oh, we had exactly the same issues. We had to build software. Have fun, enjoy the process." And essentially, their reply was, "I don't want to build software. Can I use yours?" We said no for about 2 years. And then we had an epiphany and we realized, hey, it's not just the lenders that do the loans that look like our loans. It's truly any kind of lender has this exact same problem. So we made a fairly significant business pivot and adjustment, sold our dealerships and our book of business on the lending side. And fast forward, that entire journey is 17 or so years. Fast forward to the current day, and LoanPro provides a lending core to lenders all throughout the US and Canada, continue to expand our international footprint, 800 plus lenders, and these are ranging from small mom and pop lenders to larger lenders that work with partner banks or some accounting platforms, a variety, basically any type of loan. And that solution we built as an internal solution turns out it's a really good fit for a product market fit for anyone who gives a type of loan.
Right. Okay. Wow. Such an inspiring story. Something that interested me from what you said there, you mentioned you founded the company with your two brothers. How did that affect your relationship with your brothers? Were there any challenges because you were so close?
We've always done business together. So it's kind of like growing up together. You learn to do things a certain way. So we don't really know another way to do it. And it's worked out really well. So the areas for success, a lot of people talk about the dynamics of a family business, and maybe they're imagining what would it be like within your family to run a business with your siblings and things. And so I think it's pretty easy for everyone to relate with that. What we found to be successful is areas of responsibility, right? So I run our management team, but I'm in charge of the product and the admin side of it. My brother Ben, he's across all of our different businesses we've done over the years. We've kept these same general areas of responsibility. Ben oversees all of our operations. So within the software business, he's over onboarding and customer success and compliance, all the operational sides of things. And Lloyd oversees revenue and has across all the different businesses. So this is sales, marketing, our go-to-market that sells processes, the brand, everything on the revenue side. And so we've sort of done this divide and conquer. And honestly, it's really fun. We have a great time. And you hear often founders talk about the road to success being a lonely road, right? You hear management books and others that write about being lonely. And so honestly, it's fantastic having a solid partnership where you fully trust the other people and you're able to do the journey together. Now, this has worked out real well because we started from nothing, right? And we built it together. And so maybe a partnership's not right for everybody, but it's worked out extremely well for us.
That's great to hear, and again, inspiring of that journey from, you said you started at the bottom and you've got all this way together and had that journey and seen the highs and lows together. So I think that's really cool. Great. So I hear that 2022 is going to be a huge year when it comes to product expansion and the company itself. So tell me a bit more about the plans and what that's going to look like.
Sure. So on the product side of things, historically, we started in the space of installment loans. So a closed installment loan of any kind, anyone you can imagine, of step payments or balloons or straight line amortized, or you come up with the flavor of the installment loan. And we've built out a really strong user set and case use of those types of products. Well, we're launching this product of line of credit, which is inclusive of every kind of credit card, but also inclusive of any form of line of credit. Think of a construction loan or any form of a drawing type loan. And we think this is really big. It'll be the only platform within one platform to manage that diverse of a type of product, where you can run an auto loan and a revolving credit card and a minimum pay credit card and student loans, and all of these within one platform. And the reason we can do this is because we are a loan servicing core, meaning we're not focused on the individual underwriting and decisioning, which is highly niche specific. Think of a student loan. The user experience is fundamentally different than a point of sale loan or a factoring a receivable for a B2B and so forth. So, but all of them, once you get to the point where the decision's been made, a student loan's 90-something% the same as an auto loan. And that's roughly the same percentage crossover between the other types of loans. So we've built a configuration first platform to manage all these different kinds of loans. So really the big one is the launching of the line of credit. We always have a continued expansion of bells and whistles and features within the software to focus on the user experience. And there's a fairly long list of those things. But the watershed one, the big focus, is this line of credit and its expansion to allow lenders to have a variety of types of products within one platform.
Amazing. Sounds really exciting. Okay. Great. Now everyone talks about the highs and the lows of startup life, and I'm sure you've experienced both. Are there any particular moments in your startup career where it's triggered a change in your approach to startup life?
Yeah, you bet. So we started at the beginning of that journey with not a substantial amount of capital. We had good education, and our parents put us in a great position. We call it humble, hungry, and smart, right? From the book Ideal Team Player.
Love it.
And the idea was to put yourself in a position where you can take advantage of the opportunities that life presents. But you can kind of accelerate that by being actively engaged rather than waiting for life just to give something to you. Just be actively engaged and go with that. So the partnership has been really successful for us because it flattens out the highs and low bumps. It's more of a steady when you can average between the partners, right? And it helps out a lot in that way. So somebody's having a rough day or quarter or whatever, and you're able to provide assistance to them and it offsets. And so that's been one of the successes of the partnerships. But certainly startup life is a highly volatile in that the swings can happen. If you're really earlier, let's say 10 years ago, landing a big deal or not would make all the difference if the business was profitable. Now we've ran a profitable business for more than a decade now, but it's hard when you have to take an idea and turn it into reality. And there's a lot of unknowns and things yet to be discovered in that journey. And that creates a little bit of volatility. So what we found the successes for us, and this is something we've learned over time, is before you hire and increase your expenditures to do so, first understand what the folks are going to be doing that you're hiring and have a deep understanding of theirs. So probably the best way to do that is to stand up that department and understand the nuances, meaning you don't have to do everything, but you need to understand how would you measure their successes. And this really provides good direction to the different departments and team members that you hire and bring on so that they have a high probability of being successful because you have an easy way to measure that success instead of what normally happens in the startup world. You hire a really smart person and say very generic things like, do good, right? Oh, how are you going to do that?
Yeah.
So I think that's been one strategy for us.
Okay.
And it gives us a better understanding as we move from one department to another. And that helps it be less volatile. And it helps so that you don't have to have this business that's swinging so much. And from our side, we're providing a core operating system to our customers. So it's paramount that we have stability, not only financial stability by being profitable and free cash flow, but also just stability in roadmap direction and products and the team members and so forth. So one example, the culture that we've built out to help startup life be less volatile. We're in the fintech space, which if you look at the turnover, depending on geography, is fairly insane, right? You hire a really smart person and they churn within, on the low end, maybe 12 or 14 months, but not longer than 3 years, right? So you have this kind of revolving door. So as soon as they know what they're doing, they're gone. And that's really a big challenge. Cool. Well, we've built out a culture that my CTO, Cesar, has been with us for 11 plus years. Yeah. And so to find a non-founder CTO in fintech that's been there more than a decade, it's very unusual. Yeah. And if you look at all of the team members that we've built out across, we're 130 plus, 140 people now. We have high levels of stickiness of not only customers, but also employees because the culture that you build out. And so that really helps to flatten the volatility curve that are typically associated with startups. So we've tried to be really thoughtful about what's the life we want to have and how do you create that, and putting yourself in the shoes of all of the parties involved and creating a culture and the environment where you can have that. So those are some tips and some ideas that we've learned in our career about how to mute some of the volatility that happens. That might be emotional volatility, it might be revenue, it might be all of those things that play into the space of why startup life is so difficult. And it changes over time as your numbers get bigger, as you get a bigger team, as you make more money, it gets easier, but your problems just change. It's exchanging one set of problems for a different set of problems. You gotta kind of pick which one you want. And I do think the one being scaled and profitable is a more desirable position to be in than when you're brand new. But it doesn't happen by chance. And it doesn't mean if you do everything right that it's going to work out either. You still have to have an excellent idea. You have to have an excellent execution and strategy and timing and market and all of those other things that you may or may not have control of. Those have been some of the inputs that we've had and learnings that we've had along the way of how to make it a less volatile experience.
Okay, great. I mean, yeah, culture in particular is such a big conversation at the moment, whether it's in the recruitment world or your world as well. So
Right.
I guess if there are any founders listening to this or someone who wants to start a fintech company, what should they implement within their company? What specifically, can you give an example of something Loan Pro does to have such an amazing culture?
Yeah, so we think about compensation with 5 different things, and I won't mention each one of them, but of course, money's on the list, right? So money makes the world go round, and everybody needs to be paid well and incentivized and aligned incentives. But I think a lot of folks, they say pay them a bunch of money and they'll do what you want them to, but that's just not true. There's reasons that really smart people that make a ton of money are looking for a new job.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not just money that drives the incentives. It's the culture of what you have. And what I mean by that is, do you provide an environment that's interesting?
Yeah.
If the job I'm going to hire on and work with you is that I'm going to learn new things every day, is from the technology side, what tech stacks do you use? What languages are you using? What's innovative? What problem am I solving? What's the expanse of that problem? How does our team work together? Do I get time to work on projects that are interesting to me that are not directly within the roadmap of the business that discovery can come out of? How do teams work together? Those kinds of things.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, there's the intellectual curiosity and stimulation that when we hire people, I like to be pretty blunt and I say, I don't want you to currently know how to do everything we're going to ask you to do.
Yeah.
If you already know how to do it all, then you're going to be bored. It's not going to be interesting to you anymore. You're not engaged.
Exactly.
And so,
point. Yeah.
So we try to provide an environment where we call it like almost imprinting, right? Where after you've been here for a few cycles, you should see your DNA in the business, regardless of what your role is. You should have some form of an imprint that you've done on the business, and the business is different because you were here. Mm-hmm. If you're on the development side, maybe it's something you're coding or a design or an idea or some technology or efficiencies. Mm-hmm. Maybe it's a product that's designed. If you're, in policy or process or compliance or audit or any of those kinds of things, you can see the examples there. So one that's really successful for us has been this concept of letting the best idea win, regardless of who it comes from. Mm-hmm. Now, that's easy to say, but how do you build an environment that your brand new intern can raise their hand on week number 2 and say, hey, I don't think it's very efficient the way you're doing X, Y, and Z. And the business will say, you know what, you're right. Yeah. And make a change because of that. If you provide an environment that does that, imagine being in the shoes of that brand new intern and they see, I can make a change. This is really interesting. This is a place I want to be. So I think that the culture is not just a buzzword. There's a lot of complexities to it. I mentioned just the tip of the iceberg. Yeah. But it's creating the environment where people can become their best self. And so for me, in our interview processes, we're hiring people, I like to ask the question, how by joining Loan Pro does it help you become who you want to be? Yeah. And that has a lot of assumptions in it. One, you kind of know who you want to be. I would argue most people don't. They haven't spent the time to articulate in their own mind, who do they want to be with whatever timeline? Instead, they're busy, head down, working on something. Yeah. And so that's one of our missions, is to help all of our team members to define and to decide who do they want to be, not just professionally, but in their entire life. And then to have a machine that we build here that helps to facilitate the environment for them to become that person. We're not giving it to them. We're providing the environment for them to choose to become.
Yeah. Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, that support for progression, I think, is becoming more and more important. And like you said, I think most people don't even think about it because they're too busy doing their everyday 9 to 5 to even for it to cross their mind. So that's great. So following on from that, if you could go back and sit your 20-year-old self down and have a conversation with yourself, what would you tell yourself?
It's a great question. Obviously, it'd be nice to have some thought into foresight of what would happen in the market and so forth. But I think that it's somewhat of the strategy, right? Maybe be less critical. I've learned over time of that, less critical of both yourself and of others, being more open. The younger I was, the more black and white the world was. And the older I'm getting, the more gray it actually is. So I think that that's appropriate. I think also it took me a while to internalize this concept, right? McKinsey's first law is understand your problem. And you read that in business school and you understand it and everybody knows that. But like, actually, what does that mean? And I think there's been some really interesting products that have been developed that were not a good product market fit. And so that's been a blessing that we've had. And if you look, it's not unique to us. There's a whole bunch of companies, including like Slack, right? That are a company that is a spin-off of what was an internal tool to a different company. And I think the reason that's so successful is that you have an excellent product to market fit because you couldn't find a product on the marketplace for the need that you had. So you built it, it's an internal tool, and then it converts. So when I came out of business school, I didn't know that I was going to start a fintech company, right? We did it's a journey that you try to figure out. I intended to go back to Wall Street and be an asset manager. And, when I grow up, maybe I'll do that one day. But the be less prescriptive is, I think, what the recommendation I would make to myself in younger years is you don't have to have it all figured out, but you do need to keep your eyes wide open because opportunities present themselves. But if you're not looking for them, you'll miss them.
Okay. Now, forgive me for bringing up the dreaded COVID word, but I'm going to have to because there's some really interesting stories, I think, particularly within the startup space of how it's been dealt with. So can you give me some insight into how that affected Loan Pro and I guess what you learned from COVID?
Yeah, COVID was interesting, right? So we're a loan servicing software or a lending core. One of our advantages is we're fully architected and built in the cloud. So we actually had a pretty strong adoption of new customers because they were dealing with sending people to move from on-prem solutions to now they're working remote. And if you're the CTO of a bank and you have the difficulty of, well, how do you get your employees to work remotely and still be productive and provide them the necessary tools and resources to do their job? Well, it becomes kind of difficult depending on how your networks and infrastructure work. The folks that were using us were 100% cloud-based. And so it was sort of a plug and play for them. And so that's been an encouragement, and the ecosystem has everybody already knew it, but the timeline was uncertain. So now everybody fully has adopted that they know that they need to modernize their tech stack. So that was an advantage for us, where we are providing a modernized tech stack where we're getting higher adoption rates from in traditional lenders because now that's a high priority for them. But it's not just an element of being remote, right? It's also the element of latency in the data, access to the data, visibility, control, and so forth. On the other side, for COVID, there was a lot of uncertainty as to how the equity markets and the financial market for how loans would work would occur, right? And so we saw in the early days of March 2020, we saw a strong tightening of new loans being underwritten and issued in some verticals. But oddly enough, we saw other verticals that were having Black Friday numbers every day. You're like, well, this is really interesting. There's a shift of what kinds of loans. And so then with the quantitative easing and sort of the free money being passed out to people, we've seen a significant increase in consumer type loans, typically point of sale or the buy now, pay later, or a variety of additional, depending on SMB lending, factoring and receivables. all of these innovative financial products that are meeting the consumer or the customer where they're at. And there's been some underserved markets. And so our tagline is to power financial innovation, really by providing the tools in the tool belt of these new ideas where folks can build financial products. So COVID, although it's pretty terrible. There's been a lot of people die. There's been a lot of difficulties that will probably take decades to figure out, the mental toll that's taken on people and relationships and all of the ripple impact of essentially this great experiment that we all of a sudden tried to do. And will it turn out well or not? Well, that's not my area of expertise, but I do know within the technology and the financial markets, we've priced that in now. And that black swan event that occurs, we now know that technology is one of the tools to combat those sorts of situations. And we do see things that will be lingering and likely long-standing, right? Working remote, more of a hybrid work model, a technology enabling geography where you're hiring people, and so forth. There's a fairly lengthy list of things that will stick around due to COVID. But the impact to our business is for example, here in the United States, we did these PPP loans. And it was somewhat of a disaster in how they were launched, right? The rules were changing in some circumstances daily. And so there would be something issued by the government that would say final, in the title would be final, and then it'd be the rules of how it's going to work. And then a week later or 2 days later, there'd be a new final rule that would come out that would change all the rules of how the previous final rule changed. And so, and it was just the SBA was working really hard. They had new rules. They had to build a tech stack with an API as fast as they could. A lot of parties threw their hands in to help there, including Amazon, to get this up and running, to try to get money infused into this small businesses, which are the primary employer here in the United States. And there was a lot of inefficiencies that happened in it, and a lot of learnings that have occurred, some fraud that occurred, and so forth. Well, we were the very first one to launch the servicing side of that. There were special rules on how these particular loans worked, and when the payments would be due, and so forth. And so we were launching and changing and updating through configuration product offerings that matched these new PPP loans where lenders were giving them. And I think we had 12 PPP lenders using our software to issue these loans. And other organizations, it took them months to do so. And so that wasn't a great user experience. If you're a small business, you have the uncertainty of what's happening in the marketplace and you want to get a loan, you don't want to wait months to figure out if you could apply and how it's going to work. And so a lot of banks were working really hard with archaic systems, including physical processing of documents, and having a modern tech stack that enables the dynamic flexibility. And so I think that's one of the learnings that's not unique to us, but the ecosystem said, hey, we need to be able to move fast, accurate, and we don't know exactly what the products of tomorrow are going to be. And so we need a system that can move with us quickly. And so we're hearing that a lot from folks in the ecosystem to say, all right, it's time, we have to update this tech stack. So it was kind of a long answer, but there's a lot. I mean, there's a ton of things from COVID, both on technology and how folks work, but also I think that it was the catalyst in consumers accepting new faces of who they engage with. And so you see a lot of new finance companies that have popped up, and they're working with partner banks or maybe balance sheet or various kinds of lenders there's less hesitation from the consumer space to engage with them because people, not just businesses, but people are becoming used to working remote. So I think that COVID accelerated the retirement of physical banks and branches. I think over time, the need to have a physical bank and branch will be significantly diminished. They don't go away to zero. But if you could do it in an app or on a website, why would you physically go into a branch or store? Especially as your generations that are doing these financial transactions are more and more familiar with technology. So I think that COVID was pretty clear that you can survive and have all of your branches closed.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's great to hear that with such an uncertain time, it had such a positive impact on you guys. I mean, there's always going to be positives and negatives, but I think one particular thing most people learn was how to adapt, and that's whether it's technology or people. So that's definitely what I took away. So with your personal development and how you've changed since being in the startup world, what are some of the changes you've noticed?
Yeah, this is one that it maybe sounds a little cliche, but you learn how to handle more, right? Something that I do now would have been a much higher level of stress on me, the same actions 2 decades ago. And so you learn just to handle it. So, there's all stories throughout history, throughout the Bible, throughout a variety where you rise to the occasion. And I think that being under a large level of stress helps you mature and grow and build the abilities to handle the stress and strategies about how to do so. So I think that's probably one of the biggest personal development sides to it is knowing how to manage and balance all and juggle all of the things that are happening and what you should delegate, what you shouldn't delegate, how to manage them, what to get worried and have highlight or escalate to the top of your priority list. And so then you just learn, I'll call them coping skills, but they're real just management skills, right? How do you prioritize your day? How do you de-stress? So a big one for me on the personal side, I like to swim for exercise. And there's something about swimming and the repetitiveness where I will study some of my most complex problems that I don't know the answers to. And then I'll jump in the pool, swim a mile, and often, not every time, but often I've kind of worked it out in my mind where I'm in the pool swimming, the repetitiveness to it. You just let your mind really focus on these. And then often you have an idea of, hey, what if we did it this way? And then you can take that. So I think that's been one of the interesting ones. A lot of people do that when they go to sleep. They study for a few minutes their problems, have a notepad next to the side of their bed, those kinds of things. So I think there's a little, life hacks or tricks, but in general, I think that folks learn how to manage stress better and what's important and what's not important.
For sure. No, I might try that. It sounds like an interesting one. I might have to try it myself. Okay, last question before we wrap up then. So who are your role models and why?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. Sometimes it's difficult where it's always bothered me where you will ask somebody who's an expert on one particular topic. You'll ask them questions in unrelated fields and care what their answer is, right? So the one that's always bothered me is why we ask professional athletes political or personal or various other kinds of recommendations when clearly their expertise is not in that field. They're an excellent at whatever their sport is, or maybe even where their education's at, but we're asking them off-topic questions. And then we're treating their answers as if they were a well-informed answer. And that's always sort of bothered me. So I will answer this question in the form of who are some role models? Well, really they're topic specific. It's not that there's just a single person that gets everything I'm looking for. You sort of pick topic specific. So I think that there's been a major adjustment and change moving through the Renaissance and information age and so forth. I think we're now in what will be called a product age, where those who are designing products are starting to lead the world. So Elon Musk obviously has done an amazing job in so many areas, and he is the king of product. He's just done an amazing job of product. Now, he hasn't managed every area of his life. Excellent. He marriages and being a father and those areas too. There's some question on those and how those have managed, but that doesn't in any way diminish the king that he is of product. He's done an amazing job of that. And in the same ways, I've got some role models of the type of father that I want to be, my own father, examples that I've seen in my life, the type of husband I want to be. And so you kind of take the areas of your life and choose those who are the best at those, and hopefully stitch them together and mean that you can bring them into who you become. But I would use those kind of examples instead of saying one role model got it all right. Instead, choose the best out of all of those that you can interact with or look at, and try to become who you want to become by stitching together examples of others.
Yeah, and it's a great mindset to have. I absolutely agree with you on that one. Okay. Well, I did say that was my last question, but it's not. For our listeners, if they were to take anything away from this podcast, whether they are an entrepreneur, a salesperson, whatever they are, what should they take from this?
Yeah, I think the encouragement of there's a book that I read when I was a little kid, and the famous quote of whatever the mind of a man can conceive and believe, he can achieve, right? So CBA. And I think that's true. The delight and enjoyment of turning an idea into reality is so satisfying. So the encouragement would be not that you just jump in and do it, but that you thoughtfully say, who do I want to become? What problem do I want to solve? And then get busy doing so.
Yeah, love it. Great. Well, thank you so much for joining me. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you on, and I've really, really enjoyed hearing all about your journey and Loan Pro. I'm really excited to see what happens over the next 12 months for you guys as well. Sounds like it's going to be a super interesting time.
Great. Well, Holly, thanks for your time. Appreciate all you do, and have a great day.
Thanks, and thank you to everyone listening. Tune in next time for Growing Tech Fast.